I saw something in my bathroom mirror. And it spoke. I don't think I've ever hated a bathroom before. Not until now. It started last week when I was brushing my teeth. You know that feeling when something is just off? Like the hum of the fridge sounds different, or the way a room smells has shifted in a way you can't quite explain. That's how it felt when I glanced up at the mirror. At first, it was subtle. My reflection didn't feel like me. I know that sounds ridiculous, of course, it's me, but something about the way it looked back at me wasn't right. The lighting in the bathroom made my eyes look a little darker than they should have been, almost hollow. I leaned in closer to inspect them, trying to see if I was just tired or if the new LED bulbs were messing with my face. But as I leaned closer, so did my reflection. And then it stopped, a fraction of a second too late. I froze, toothbrush dangling from my mouth, foam dripping onto the sink. I convinced myself I was imagining things. The lag was just my tired brain playing tricks on me. I forced a laugh, shook my head, and finished brushing my teeth. The next morning, I avoided the mirror entirely. It was stupid, I know, but I couldn't shake the unease from the night before. I did my whole routine staring at the sink instead. It felt silly, but at least I could get ready without the nagging anxiety creeping up my neck. By the third morning, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I had to shave, and not being able to see what I was doing wasn't exactly an option. I grabbed my razor and lathered my face with cream, trying to ignore the jittery feeling in my stomach as I finally looked up. It wasn't just the timing this time. The reflection of the bathroom wasn't quite right. The background was off. The shower curtain behind me looked flatter, like it was a photograph instead of real fabric. And my reflection's eyes didn't seem to match my gaze. They were always just slightly off-center, as if staring at something over my shoulder. I set the razor down, hands trembling, and splashed water on my face. I didn't look back up. By the time night came around, I'd convinced myself that I was overthinking everything. Maybe I was stressed from work or just seeing things in bad lighting. I made myself look in the mirror again, just to prove there was nothing wrong. Big mistake. At first, it was normal. My face, my bathroom. Everything as it should be. But then my reflection smiled. I didn't. It wasn't a big, toothy grin, just a subtle curl of the lips. I froze, waiting for it to stop, but it didn't. It just stood there, staring back at me with that faint, knowing smirk, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. My hands started to sweat, and I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. I reached up to touch my face, and my reflection mirrored me perfectly. But the smile stayed. No matter what I did, frown, squint, tilt my head, its expression never changed. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the soap dispenser. I should have turned and run, slammed the bathroom door shut, and pretended it wasn't happening. But I couldn't. I was stuck there, rooted to the tiles, staring at this impossible thing in front of me. That's when it spoke. Not out loud, but in my head. Don't look away. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't even human. It was a low, guttural whisper, scraping against the inside of my skull like nails on glass. My knees buckled, and I had to grip the sink to keep from collapsing. I blinked, hard, and for a moment, everything was normal again. My reflection moved with me, its face no longer locked in that eerie smile. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. The voice came again, this time louder. Don't you dare. It didn't want me to stop looking. I did the only thing that felt sane at the time, I bolted out of the bathroom. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out my thoughts. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, sitting on the couch with the TV on, volume low. The bathroom door was shut, and I swore I wouldn't go back in. Not that night. But when I woke up the next morning, I found it wide open. I stared at it, heart thudding in my chest. The light was off, but I could feel something pulling at me. It was as if the mirror itself was daring me to come closer, to look. I tried to shake the feeling, to convince myself I'd just forgotten to close the door properly. I stepped inside, and everything looked normal. The mirror reflected me as it should. No smiles, no whispers, no strange timing. I felt stupid for being so scared the night before. Then I noticed the smudge. A faint, dark streak stretched across the lower edge of the glass, just behind where my reflection's hand rested. My real hand was clean, nothing on it, but in the mirror, it looked like I'd dragged it through something. Something thick, dark, and sticky. I stepped back instinctively, but my reflection stayed put. It didn't move. For the longest few seconds of my life, it just stood there, staring at me. Its head tilted slightly, and a sickening realization hit me: it wasn't copying me anymore. It wasn't me. I turned and ran. But as I left the room, I caught something in my peripheral vision. My reflection had turned around to watch me leave. I avoided the bathroom for the rest of the day. I used the half bath downstairs, kept the door shut, and pretended the upstairs didn't exist. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every reflective surface felt like a threat: the windows, the microwave, even the glossy screen of my phone. That night, I heard it. It was faint at first. A soft tapping, like fingernails against glass. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when it started. Tap. 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 My stomach twisted. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was the wind or the pipes. But it grew louder. Tap. 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 It wasn't random. It had a rhythm. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. It was coming from the bathroom. My skin crawled. I lay frozen under the covers, heart hammering, willing it to stop. It didn't. Then it spoke. "You left me." The voice was faint, muffled, like it was coming from behind the bathroom door. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't anything I recognized. "You shouldn't have left," it said again. The tapping stopped, replaced by a slow, scraping sound. Metal against glass. I couldn't stay in bed anymore. I grabbed my phone, its faint glow the only light in the room, and crept to the hallway. The bathroom door was open just a crack, darkness spilling out like smoke. I could see the mirror. And something else, something moving in the glass. A hand. Pale, thin fingers clawing at the surface as if trying to break through. My breath hitched, and the hand froze. Slowly, it turned, as if sensing me. Then the voice whispered again, closer this time. "I see you." The door slammed shut. The door didn't just slam, it shook the walls. I stumbled back, clutching my phone like it was some kind of shield. For a moment, everything was still. The house was silent, the door to the bathroom shut tight. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever was in there had stopped. But then came the scratching. It was faint at first, almost like paper being torn. Then it turned into a high-pitched screech, like nails dragging against a chalkboard. The sound made my teeth ache. It was coming from the other side of the bathroom door, something clawing at the wood, trying to get out. My body locked up. My legs refused to move. Let me out. The voice was low, guttural, and unmistakably angry. It wasn't whispering anymore. It was demanding. I backed away, step by step, my heels catching on the carpet. My phone's flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Then the doorknob started to turn. It rattled violently, as if whatever was inside was trying to wrench it open. The scratching grew louder, faster, until it sounded like dozens of claws tearing at the door all at once. My breath caught in my throat, and I bolted. I ran down the stairs, not stopping until I was in the kitchen, every light in the house blazing. I grabbed the biggest knife I could find and stood there, shaking, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the house was quiet again. No footsteps. No voices. No tapping. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the kitchen doorway, knife in hand. It could have been minutes or hours. Time felt warped, stretched thin by my fear. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I needed to leave, get out of the house entirely. I grabbed my keys and made it to the front door, but just as I reached for the handle, something stopped me. A feeling, sharp and cold, like an icicle stabbing into my gut. I turned around. The lights in the hallway flickered, one by one, until only the faint glow from the bathroom upstairs was visible. The door was wide open now, the mirror facing the hallway like a gaping maw. And standing in the reflection was me. But it wasn't me. My reflection was staring down at me from the top of the stairs. Its face was wrong, too pale, too thin, with dark, sunken eyes that didn't blink. Its lips curled into that same eerie smile I'd seen before, and it raised a hand, waving slowly, mockingly. Then it spoke. "You can't leave." The words weren't loud, but they carried through the house, filling every corner. My legs buckled, and I dropped the knife. My reflection tilted its head, curious, as if enjoying my fear. "Why are you running?" it asked, its voice dripping with mockery. "You belong here. With me." I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the floor, my chest heaving as I fought to breathe. The reflection stepped closer, its movements smooth and deliberate, until it was standing at the edge of the mirror's frame. And then it did something impossible. It reached out. A pale, skeletal hand slid through the glass like it was water, fingers curling around the edge of the mirror. The surface rippled as it pushed forward, its arm now halfway out. The sight made my stomach churn. The thing wasn't just trying to escape, it was succeeding. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, grabbing the knife off the floor. I didn't know what good it would do against, whatever this was, but it was all I had. The reflection's head turned sharply, its smile widening. "You're not ready," it said, almost laughing. With a sudden burst of energy, I turned and ran out the door, slamming it shut behind me. My feet pounded against the pavement as I sprinted down the street, not stopping until I was far away from the house. I looked back only once. The bathroom window was glowing faintly, and in it, I saw the reflection again, watching me leave. Its smile hadn't faded that I didn't stop running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they'd give out. I ended up at an all-night diner, one of those greasy places where nobody asks questions. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I slumped into a booth, trembling. The waitress came over, her tired eyes scanning my face. I ordered coffee, though I wasn't planning to drink it. I just needed to sit, to think, to breathe. But the moment I stopped moving, the fear caught up with me. The image of that hand reaching through the glass wouldn't leave my mind. Worse, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The diner felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty. My reflection in the diner's window stared back at me. I told myself it was normal, just me. But I couldn't stop watching it out of the corner of my eye. It didn't move unless I moved, but something about it felt off. Like it was waiting. I pulled out my phone, thinking I'd call someone, anyone, but the battery was dead. It had been nearly full when I left the house. A chill ran down my spine. I shoved it back into my pocket, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. When the waitress brought the coffee, I asked, "Can you tell me what time it is?" She frowned. "Clock's right there, hon." I looked where she was pointing, at the diner's wall clock. It was stopped. The hands pointed at 3:17, but they weren't moving. "Your clock's broken," I said. She glanced up at it, then back at me, looking confused. "No, it's not." Before I could respond, the lights in the diner flickered. Just once, but long enough to make my stomach drop. When they came back on, I swore the reflection in the window was closer. I shoved the coffee aside and stood up, heart hammering. "I need to go," I muttered, grabbing my jacket. It reached out a hand, its fingers brushing the edge of the water, ripples spreading out like it was trying to pull itself through. I didn't wait to see if it could. I turned and ran into the night, the sound of footsteps trailing close behind. I didn't know where I was going, just away. The town felt different, like I'd slipped into some twisted version of it. The streets were too dark, the buildings seemed taller, and every shadow stretched unnaturally long. And the reflections were everywhere. In windows, in puddles, even in the faint shine of metal street signs, I could see them. Faces and shapes that didn't belong, staring out at me with hollow eyes and faint, mocking smiles. They moved when I didn't, their heads tilting, hands reaching, as though testing the boundaries of their prison. The thought struck me, they want out. I stumbled into an alleyway, leaning against a brick wall to catch my breath. The air felt heavier, thicker, like it was pressing down on me. My eyes darted to a broken shard of glass lying near a dumpster. In its jagged surface, I saw something move. Not me, but a pale hand reaching upward, its long fingers scraping against the edges of the glass. "Why are you running?" a voice echoed. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, filling the alley with a deep, guttural resonance. I kicked the shard away and bolted. The voice followed, weaving through the air like smoke. "You can't escape. You're part of this now." The words crawled under my skin, but I didn't look back. I ran until I burst out onto the main road, nearly tripping over the curb. The streetlights flickered, casting the world in a sickly yellow hue. That's when I saw the mirror. A massive, old-standing mirror sat in the middle of the road, its ornate frame cracked and weathered. It didn't belong there, it couldn't have. But the longer I stared, the more it seemed like the road bent around it, like it was the center of everything. In the glass, I saw myself, or something that looked like me. It was closer to the figure I'd seen before, too pale, too thin, with those empty, hollow eyes. It smiled at me, the corners of its mouth stretching far too wide. "You're almost ready," it whispered. I took a step back, but the ground beneath me felt wrong, soft, like I was standing on something unstable. The reflection raised its hand, and I felt a cold pressure on my chest, like fingers pressing against my ribs. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. It tilted its head, the smile never wavering. "To trade places." Before I could react, the mirror rippled, its surface warping like water. The thing inside it reached out, its hand breaching the glass with a wet, sloshing sound. The moment its fingers touched the air, the world around me seemed to flicker. The buildings warped, the streetlights dimmed, and the air grew colder. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the pavement. The thing's hand stretched further, followed by its arm, its movements slow and deliberate. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to put distance between us, but the voice came again, louder this time. "Don't run. You can't leave. It's your turn now." The glass around the figure cracked, splintering like a spiderweb. Each fracture seemed to echo in my head, a deafening, relentless sound. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The crack spread, and I realized with growing horror that the thing wasn't just stepping through the mirror, it was pulling me toward it. The pavement under me shifted, and I felt my body sliding closer to the glass. The edges of the world blurred, the reflections around me growing darker, more vivid. Faces pressed against every shiny surface, their mouths open in silent screams. "No!" I shouted, digging my hands into the ground, trying to anchor myself. But the pull was too strong. The thing was almost fully out now, its face inches from mine. Its smile widened, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth. "Time to let go," it hissed. With a final, desperate effort, I lashed out. My hand brushed against a loose piece of broken glass, and I grabbed it, slashing wildly at the mirror. The surface shattered, the cracks spreading like lightning. The thing recoiled, its form rippling and distorting as the glass exploded into shards. For a moment, everything froze. The reflections vanished, the pull stopped, and the air felt still. Then the screaming started. It wasn't coming from me, it was coming from the shards. Dozens of voices, wailing and screeching, filling the night with a sound so inhuman it made my skin crawl. The pieces of the mirror trembled, vibrating against the ground, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the fight wasn't over. The shards began to move, sliding toward each other, reforming. The thing wasn't gone, it was rebuilding itself. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, leaving the mirror, the voices, and the horrors behind me. But even as I fled, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. The reflections weren't done with me. And I wasn't sure I could escape them this time. I didn't stop running. I couldn't. My chest felt like it was about to collapse, but the thought of stopping, of letting it catch up, was worse. The streets blurred past, and the air grew colder with every step. Something was following me, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't even a sound. It was myself. Every reflective surface I passed, windows, car mirrors, even small puddles, showed that pale, twisted version of me. The eyes, those hollow, lifeless eyes, tracked me as I ran. Sometimes it grinned, other times it didn't move at all, just stood there like it was waiting for me to give up. "You can't outrun yourself," a voice rasped, low and mocking. I stumbled, almost falling. The voice wasn't coming from behind me. It wasn't even around me. It was inside. My reflection was in my head now. I forced myself to keep going, desperate to get somewhere, anywhere that didn't feel so wrong. But the world was changing. The streets twisted in ways they shouldn't, buildings warped, and shadows stretched impossibly long. It was as if the town itself was unraveling. I finally stopped when I reached an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. The lights inside flickered weakly, casting just enough glow to make the dark seem even darker. I pushed open the door, gasping for air, and collapsed against the counter. The mirrors inside were cracked, but not enough to stop them from reflecting. I tried not to look, but it was impossible. My gaze drifted to the largest one behind the register. It wasn't my reflection anymore. The figure in the glass leaned forward, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. It placed its hands against the inside of the mirror, the glass rippling under its touch. "You're already mine," it whispered. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "You're not real. You're not." It slammed its hand against the glass, and the whole mirror shuddered. Cracks spread from where its palm had struck, jagged lines snaking across the surface. "I am real," it growled. "And I'm tired of being on this side." Before I could react, its hand punched through the glass, shards raining down as it began to pull itself through. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if the room itself was closing in on me. I grabbed the nearest object, a rusted wrench from the counter, and swung it at the mirror. The figure's head snapped toward me, its empty eyes narrowing. "Break it, and you'll only make it worse," it hissed. But I didn't care. I swung with all my strength, shattering the mirror into 100 pieces. The figure screamed, a sound that wasn't human, a mix of grinding metal and tearing flesh, and vanished. The room fell silent. I stood there, trembling, staring at the broken shards scattered across the floor. For a moment, I thought it was over. I thought I'd won. Then the shards began to move. One by one, they lifted off the floor, hanging in the air like pieces of some invisible puzzle. The fragments swirled around me, faster and faster, until they formed a perfect circle. And in that circle, I saw it. The twisted, hollow version of myself, staring back at me. It was smiling. "You can't destroy me," it said. "Because I'm you." The shards shot toward me, and I screamed. They didn't cut, they didn't even touch me. They passed through me, cold and sharp, sinking into my skin. My vision blurred, and the world seemed to tilt. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the gas station. The shards were gone, the mirror repaired, but something was wrong. My reflection stared at me. Not with fear or confusion, but with a cruel, knowing smile. I raised my hand to touch my face, and so did it. Perfectly. But when I tried to look away, it didn't. My reflection stayed in the mirror, grinning, even as I backed away. "See you on the other side," it said, its voice echoing in my head. And then it was gone. The mirrors were empty now. No reflections. No faces. Just smooth, blank glass. I thought I was free. But every time I catch my reflection now, in a car window, in a darkened screen, even in a drop of water, it's still there. Watching. Waiting. And one day, it won't let me leave.